The sun cast long shadows across Del Rio, Texas, as Charlotte Zimmerman stood trembling on the auction block, her fingers tightly intertwined with those of her frail mother, Esther. The year was 1875, and everything Charlotte had ever known their modest home. Her father's mercantile store had been stripped away following her father's death, leaving behind only debts that seemed to multiply overnight. "Next up, we have two females," the auctioneer announced, his voice carrying across the dusty town square. One young, one old, being sold together on account of the daughter refusing separation, starting bid at $50 for the pair. Charlotte, 22 years old with copper-colored hair that refused to stay pinned beneath her bonnet, squared her shoulders despite the humiliation burning her cheeks. Her mother, nearly 70 and weakened by grief and illness, swayed slightly beside her. The crowd murmured. Selling women at auction wasn't common, but it wasn't unheard of either, especially not in border towns like Del Rio, where the law stretched thin across the vast Texan landscape. Usually, it was indentured servants or prisoners working off their sentences. But the Zimmerman women had fallen victim to the crushing weight of frontier economics, where a woman without a husband or father had few protections. $50, called a saloon owner, eyeing Charlotte with unmistakable intent. 60, countered a rancher with yellowed teeth and hands rough as tree bark. Charlotte's stomach knotted. Her mother's fingers trembled in hers as bids continued, each one bringing them closer to a fate Charlotte couldn't bear to imagine. $100, came a new voice, deep and steady. The crowd parted to reveal a tall man Charlotte hadn't noticed before. He stood at the back, one boot propped on a water trough, his face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Unlike the others, he wasn't leering or calculating. His expression remained unreadable as he straightened to his full height. $110, challenged the saloon owner. $200, the stranger countered without hesitation. A hush fell over the crowd. $200 was a month's wages for many of the men present. $200 going once, the auctioneer called, unable to hide his surprise. The saloon owner scowled but shook his head. No one else spoke up. Sold, to the gentleman in the back. Charlotte's heart hammered against her ribs as the stranger approached. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to hard work and wide open spaces. As he drew closer, she could see he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of prairie grass after rain. "Ethan Harrington," he introduced himself, tipping his hat slightly as he paid the auctioneer. "I have a wagon waiting." Charlotte's throat closed with fear. "Sir, my mother needs medicine. She's not well." "We'll stop at the apothecary," he replied simply, offering his arm to Esther with surprising gentleness. They walked in silence to a sturdy wagon hitched to two chestnut horses. With practiced ease, Ethan lifted Esther into the back, where Charlotte was shocked to see he'd already arranged blankets and pillows into a makeshift bed. "The ride's rough," he explained, noticing her expression. "Thought she'd be more comfortable." True to his word, they stopped at the apothecary where Ethan purchased tonic for Esther's cough and laudanum for her pain. Charlotte watched him, confusion mingling with suspicion. What did this man want with them? Men didn't spend $200 out of charity. As they left Del Rio behind, following the meandering Rio Grande, Charlotte gathered her courage. "Mr. Harrington, I think it's only fair I understand your intentions." Ethan kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "My intentions were to keep you both from worse fates." "And what do you expect in return?" she pressed, her tone sharper than intended. He glanced at her then, his expression softening just slightly. "I need help running my ranch, cooking, cleaning, mending, nothing improper, Miss Zimmerman." "I don't believe you," Charlotte said bluntly. To her surprise, a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Wise of you, but it's the truth all the same." He gestured ahead where the trail curved around a bend. "That's my land starting at the creek yonder, 500 acres, too much for one man alone." As they crested the hill, Charlotte saw a modest but well-built cabin nestled among cottonwood trees. A barn stood nearby, alongside corrals containing horses and cattle. Smoke curled from the chimney, suggesting someone was already there. My foreman's wife will be inside, Ethan explained. Asked her to prepare rooms for you both. Rooms, Charlotte echoed. Can't have you sleeping in the barn, he said matter-of-factly as he brought the wagon to a stop. There's a small bedroom off the kitchen for your mother. Thought it would be easier for her not having to manage stairs. You'll have the loft room upstairs. Charlotte sat in stunned silence as a round-faced woman emerged from the cabin, wiping her hands on her apron. This here's Maria Rodriguez, Ethan said. Her husband Miguel is my foreman. They live in the smaller cabin just beyond the barn. Maria's warm smile was the first genuine kindness Charlotte had encountered since her father's death. I have stew ready, she said in accented English, and fresh bread. The beds are made up with clean linens. While Ethan carried Esther inside, Maria took Charlotte's hand. He is a good man, she said quietly. Strange sometimes, keeps to himself, but good. You will be safe here. Charlotte wasn't convinced, but as she helped settle her mother into a clean, comfortable bed, she allowed herself a small measure of relief. Whatever tomorrow brought, tonight they had shelter, food, and medicine more than they'd had that morning. Later, after her mother had been fed and drifted to sleep, Charlotte found Ethan on the porch, smoking a pipe as darkness settled across the land. Why did you do it? She asked without preamble. He tapped his pipe against the porch railing before answering. 5 years ago, my mother and sister were in a similar situation after my father died. No one helped them. He looked at her directly. They didn't survive the winter. Charlotte felt something shift inside her, not trust exactly, but perhaps the possibility of it. I'll work hard, she promised. For both of us. Ethan nodded, his eyes returning to the darkening landscape. I know you will. Get some rest, Miss Zimmerman. Morning comes early on a ranch. As Charlotte climbed the stairs to her new room, exhaustion finally overwhelmed her. The bed, simple but clean, beckoned. She sank onto it, fully clothed, too tired even to undress. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to hope that perhaps, just perhaps, they might survive after all. Dawn arrived with the crowing of roosters and the distant lowing of cattle. Charlotte woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until the events of the previous day came rushing back. She hastily changed into her only other dress, a faded blue calico, and hurried downstairs to check on her mother. Esther was already awake, looking better than she had in weeks. Some color had returned to her papery cheeks, and she was sitting up, slowly sipping tea that Maria must have brought. The medicine helped, Esther said, her voice stronger than it had been in days. And a proper night's rest. Charlotte kissed her mother's forehead. I need to earn our keep. Will you be all right if I help with breakfast? Go on, Esther encouraged. I'm not completely useless yet. In the kitchen, Charlotte found Maria kneading dough. The older woman looked up with a smile. Ah, good morning. There is coffee on the stove. Thank you, Charlotte said, pouring herself a cup. Please let me help. For the next hour, they worked side by side, preparing a substantial breakfast. Charlotte learned that Miguel and Ethan had already been out since before dawn, checking on a pregnant mare. As they worked, Maria shared the rhythm of ranch life, breakfast at sunrise, dinner at midday, supper after the day's work was done. The men eat like wolves, Maria chuckled, always hungry. But Senor Ethan, he is fair. Good pay, regular days off for Miguel. When the men came in, dusty and hungry, Charlotte had eggs, bacon, biscuits, and gravy waiting. Miguel greeted his wife with obvious affection, while Ethan nodded politely to Charlotte before washing his hands at the pump outside. Mare dropped her foal, he announced as he returned. Fine-looking colt. Breakfast passed with talk of ranch matters, fences needing repair, cattle to be moved to summer pastures, supplies to be ordered from town. Charlotte listened attentively, mentally cataloging all the ways she might make herself useful. After breakfast, Ethan lingered while the others dispersed to their tasks. I thought you might like to see around the property, he offered. Get your bearings, Charlotte hesitated. My mother, Maria, will look in on her, Ethan assured her. Said she has some herbal tea that might help the cough. The tour took most of the morning. The ranch, which Ethan called Riverspend, was larger than Charlotte had realized. Besides the main house and the Rodriguez's cabin, there was a bunkhouse for the occasional hired hands during roundup season, a smokehouse, a chicken coop, a substantial vegetable garden and fruit trees just beginning to blossom. The orchard was my mother's pride, Ethan explained as they walked between rows of apple and peach trees. She started it from saplings her first year here. Charlotte noted how he spoke of his mother with reverence and lingering grief. You were close to her. She taught me everything worth knowing, he replied simply, reading figures right from wrong. As they continued walking, Charlotte began to see Riverspend through new eyes. This wasn't just land and buildings, it was a home built with care and intention, a legacy Ethan was determined to preserve. What will my duties be? She asked as they headed back toward the house. Whatever you're capable of, Ethan said. The house needs a woman's touch. Been too long with just me rattling around in it, he glanced at her. But your first responsibility is your mother, I understand that. Something about his matter-of-fact acceptance of her priorities loosened a knot in Charlotte's chest. Thank you, Mr. Harrington. Ethan, he corrected. If we're going to be living under the same roof, seems unnecessary to stand on formality. The days that followed settled into a routine. Charlotte took over the household management, cooking, cleaning, and tending to her mother. To her surprise, Esther rallied under Maria's care and Charlotte's attentions. Within 2 weeks, she was strong enough to sit on the porch in the afternoons. Knitting or simply watching the activity around the ranch, Charlotte discovered unexpected satisfactions in making Riverspend a home again. She polished neglected furniture, aired out rooms that had been closed for years, and planted herbs and flowers near the kitchen door. At night, she often sat with Ethan on the porch after her mother had gone to bed, listening as he pointed out constellations or recounted the day's work. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, her wariness began to ease. Ethan never intruded on her privacy, never made inappropriate comments or gestures. He treated her with a quiet respect that Charlotte found increasingly comforting. One evening, nearly a month after their arrival, Charlotte was mending a tear in one of Ethan's shirts when he cleared his throat awkwardly. There's a supply wagon heading to Del Rio tomorrow, he said. Thought you might make a list of things you and your mother need. Charlotte looked up in surprise. We don't have money. Consider it an advance on your wages, Ethan said, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. Wages, Charlotte echoed. I thought I mean the auction. That was to get you out of a bad situation, Ethan clarified, not to own you. You work hard, you get paid. That's how it works here. For a moment, Charlotte couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. The simple dignity of earning her own way again, it was something she'd thought lost forever. Thank you, she managed finally. Ethan looked embarrassed by her emotion. It's just business, he muttered, but they both knew it was more than that. The next day, Charlotte carefully wrote out her list. Fabric for new dresses, ribbons, paper and pencils for letters, medicines for her mother, and a few small luxuries they hadn't been able to afford in months: coffee, sugar, and a bar of lavender soap. When the supplies returned 3 days later, Charlotte was astonished to find not only everything she'd requested, but also several unexpected items. A book of poetry, a small mirror, hairpins, and most surprising of all, a bolt of fine blue cotton, exactly the shade of her eyes. There's been a mistake, she told Miguel, who had driven the wagon. I didn't order these things, Miguel grinned. No mistake, señorita. Patron was very specific. That night at supper, Charlotte waited until her mother had retired before confronting Ethan. The extra items in the delivery, did I get it wrong? He interrupted, looking genuinely concerned. Maria helped me choose, said every woman needs decent fabric for Sunday clothes. It's not wrong, Charlotte said carefully. It's too much. The blue fabric alone must have cost. Do you like it? Ethan asked, his normally confident demeanor suddenly uncertain. The simple question caught her off guard. Yes, she admitted. It's beautiful, he nodded, satisfied. Then it's not too much. As spring bloomed fully into summer, life at Riverspend took on a sweetness Charlotte had never expected to find again. Her mother continued to improve, even helping with light chores and teaching Maria's youngest daughter to read English. Charlotte expanded the vegetable garden, learned to make cheese from the milk of Ethan's small dairy herd, and found herself looking forward to their evening conversations on the porch. Ethan, for his part, seemed to grow more at ease in her presence. He began bringing her wildflowers he found while riding the range, or interesting rocks and arrowheads he thought she might like. Once, he returned from a trip to a neighboring ranch with a kitten tucked inside his jacket, explaining gruffly that it had been abandoned and would make a good mouser. Charlotte named the kitten Chance after what Ethan had given her and her mother. It was on a warm July evening, with fireflies dancing across the fields, that something shifted between them. They were sitting in their usual places on the porch, Charlotte shelling peas while Ethan whittled a small wooden horse. "My birthday is tomorrow," Charlotte said suddenly, surprising herself with the admission. Ethan's hands stilled. "How old will you be?" 23, she replied. "Last year my father was still alive. We had a small cake and he gave me a hair comb that had belonged to my grandmother." Her voice caught. "It was sold with everything else to pay his debts." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "What would you like for your birthday?" Charlotte looked at him, really looked at him, the strength in his hands, the kindness in his eyes, the way the setting sun caught gold in his brown hair. For the first time, she allowed herself to acknowledge the feelings that had been growing inside her. "Time," she said softly. "Just time with you, away from chores and responsibilities. Maybe a picnic by the creek." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, certainly, but also a warmth that made her breath catch. "I think that can be arranged," he said, his voice rougher than usual. The following day dawned clear and bright. Charlotte wore her new blue dress, which Maria had helped her sew over the past weeks. Her mother smiled knowingly as Charlotte fussed with her hair. "He's a good man," Esther said quietly. "Your father would have approved." Charlotte blushed. "It's just a picnic, Mother." Esther patted her hand. "Of course it is, dear." Ethan was waiting by the porch steps, looking uncharacteristically nervous in a clean shirt and polished boots. He had a basket in one hand and led a gentle mare with the other. "Thought we might ride to the swimming hole," he suggested. "It's cooler there and the view's nice." The ride took them through meadows bright with wildflowers and along shaded paths beneath oak trees. Charlotte found herself laughing more freely than she had in months, as Ethan pointed out wildlife and told her stories about his early days on the ranch. The swimming hole proved to be a perfect crescent of clear water fed by a bubbling spring, surrounded by flat rocks ideal for sitting. Ethan spread a blanket and unpacked the basket, revealing fried chicken, biscuits, apples, and a small cake that Maria must have baked in secret. "Happy birthday, Charlotte," he said, offering her the first piece. As they ate, they talked of things they'd never discussed before: childhood memories, dreams for the future, fears and hopes. Charlotte found herself telling Ethan about her father's final days, the grief and shock of losing everything, the terror of being put up for auction. "I kept thinking if only we could get to my aunt in San Antonio," she confessed. "But we had no money for passage and Mother was too weak to travel that far on foot." Ethan's expression darkened. "What happened to you shouldn't happen to anyone." "But it did bring us here," Charlotte said quietly, "to River's Bend. To you." Their eyes met, and Charlotte felt something pass between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been building for weeks. Ethan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and touched her cheek with calloused fingertips. "I never expected to feel this way again," he murmured. "After losing my family, I thought it was safer to be alone. And now," Charlotte whispered, "now I think being alone is just being half alive." His hand moved to cradle the back of her neck. "Charlotte," she leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question asked and answered in the meeting of lips and the shared breath that followed. When they finally pulled apart, Ethan's eyes were bright with emotion. "I didn't bring you here for this," he said earnestly. "You have to believe that." "I do," Charlotte assured him, because somehow, despite everything, she trusted this man who had saved her and her mother from destitution and asked for nothing in return. "I believe in you, Ethan Harrington." They returned to the ranch as the sun was setting, riding double on Ethan's horse, Charlotte's back warm against his chest, his arms secure around her waist. At the house, Ethan helped her down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Good night, Charlotte," he said softly. "Happy birthday." She stood on tiptoe and kissed his cheek. "Thank you for everything." Inside, her mother was waiting, pretending to knit but obviously eager for details. "Did you have a nice time, dear?" Charlotte couldn't help the smile that spread across her face. "Yes, mother, a very nice time." Esther's knowing look said everything words could not. The days that followed were filled with stolen moments and meaningful glances. Ethan found reasons to be around the house more often, offering to help Charlotte with chores or simply sitting nearby while she worked. In the evenings, they still sat on the porch, but now their hands often found each other's, fingers entwining as they watched the stars appear. It was Esther who finally broke the spell of unspoken intentions. One evening at supper, she set down her fork with deliberate precision and looked from Charlotte to Ethan and back again. "Young man," she said firmly, "I believe you have something to ask my daughter. And while I appreciate your respect for propriety, I'm not getting any younger." Ethan choked on his coffee. Charlotte felt her face flame with embarrassment. "Mother, well, it's true," Esther said unapologetically. "You two have been making eyes at each other for weeks. Either declare your intentions or stop mooning about like lovesick calves." There was a moment of stunned silence before Ethan surprised them both by laughing, a full, rich sound Charlotte had rarely heard from him. "Yes, madam," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "You're absolutely right." He turned to Charlotte, suddenly serious. "I had a whole speech planned, practiced it while riding fence yesterday." "You did?" Charlotte asked, her heart racing. Ethan nodded, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Charlotte Zimmerman, I love you. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you stood on that auction block, head high despite everything. I'd be honored if you'd consent to be my wife." Charlotte felt tears prick at her eyes. "But what about Mother? She needs both of you," Ethan interrupted gently. "I want both of you here as my family. This is your home for as long as you want it, no matter what." Esther sniffed loudly. "Well, that settles that. Now, when's the wedding?" And so it was decided. They would marry in September, when the worst of the summer heat had passed. But before the autumn rains made travel difficult for the few guests, they wanted to invite the pastor from Del Rio, some neighboring ranchers, and the shopkeepers who had been kind to Charlotte during her father's illness. The weeks of preparation passed in a blur of activity. Charlotte sewed a wedding dress from fine cream muslin Ethan ordered from San Antonio. Maria and her daughters helped make paper flowers and decorations. Esther, now strong enough to move about freely, took charge of planning the meal and baking the wedding cake. Ethan, meanwhile, threw himself into a secret project that kept him working late into the evenings. He refused to let Charlotte near the old storage room at the back of the house, enlisting Miguel to help him with whatever mysterious task occupied his time. "It's a surprise," was all he would say when Charlotte tried to wheedle information from him. 2 days before the wedding, Ethan finally led Charlotte to the closed door, his hands covering her eyes. "Ready?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. "Yes," she whispered, trembling with anticipation. The door creaked open, and Ethan guided her inside before removing his hands. "You can look now." Charlotte opened her eyes to find the plain storage room transformed. The walls had been whitewashed, the floor scrubbed clean and covered with a woven rug. A rocking chair sat near a window that had been enlarged to let in more light. Along one wall stood a beautifully crafted cradle, its wood polished to a warm glow. "Ethan," Charlotte breathed, turning in a slow circle. "What is this?" His expression was a mixture of hope and vulnerability. "A nursery for someday. And a place for your mother to sit and rock any grandchildren that might come along." Charlotte's hand flew to her mouth as emotion overwhelmed her. In this simple room, Ethan had built not just furniture but a future one that included all three of them, with the possibility of more to come. "It's perfect," she managed through tears. "Absolutely perfect." Their wedding day dawned clear and cool, with just enough breeze to rustle the paper flowers decorating the ranch yard. Charlotte stood before a small mirror in her room, hardly recognizing the woman who looked back at her. Gone was the desperate, frightened girl from the auction block. In her place stood a bride, her copper hair crowned with wildflowers, her cream dress complementing the healthy glow of her skin. A knock at the door announced her mother, resplendent in a new dress of lavender silk, another of Ethan's generosities. "Oh, Charlotte," Esther sighed. "You look beautiful." Charlotte took her mother's hands. "Are you happy, mother?" Truly, Esther's eyes filled with tears. "Happier than I ever expected to be again after your father died. Ethan has given us both a second chance at life. And he loves you like a mother," Charlotte added softly. "I see how he looks to you for approval, how he treasures your advice." "As it should be," Esther said, straightening Charlotte's neckline. "Now, I believe your bridegroom is waiting, and if the way he was pacing at breakfast is any indication, his nerves won't hold out much longer." The ceremony itself was simple but heartfelt. Standing before the ranch house, with the land they both loved stretching out around them, Charlotte and Ethan exchanged vows that had been written on their hearts long before this day. "I take you as my wife," Ethan promised, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, "to love and protect, to honor and cherish for all the days of our lives." "I take you as my husband," Charlotte returned, her heart so full she could barely speak, "to love and support, to honor and cherish for all the days of our lives." The pastor blessed their union, and Ethan kissed his bride as their small gathering of friends and neighbors applauded. Esther dabbed at her eyes, accepting the handkerchief Miguel offered with a gracious nod. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with food and dancing and laughter filling the ranch yard. As twilight descended, lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the festivities. Ethan and Charlotte moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes, their hands seldom apart. Finally, as the hour grew late, Esther shooed them toward the house. "Go on now," she insisted. "Your guests will understand." With shy smiles and final waves, the newlyweds retreated to their home, truly theirs now, in every sense, in the privacy of their bedroom, with moonlight streaming through open curtains. Charlotte and Ethan discovered each other anew. Their coming together was tender, passionate, a physical expression of the love that had grown between them through months of shared work and quiet conversations, of mutual respect and deepening trust. Afterward, lying in Ethan's arms, Charlotte traced the contours of his face with gentle fingers. "I never thought I'd be this happy again," she confessed. "After everything that happened, life gave us both second chances," Ethan murmured, pressing a kiss to her palm. "And I intend to make the most of mine, Mrs. Harrington." Charlotte smiled at her new name. "As will I, Mr. Harrington." "As will I." The years that followed brought changes to Riversbend, some expected, others not. The spring after their wedding, Charlotte discovered she was expecting their first child. Ethan's joy was matched only by Esther's, who immediately set about knitting tiny garments and offering advice on everything from morning sickness to baby names. In December of 1876, Edward Harrington entered the world after a difficult labor that left Charlotte weak, but triumphant. Ethan, who had paced outside the bedroom door for nearly 20 hours, wept openly when he first held his son. "He has your chin," Charlotte observed tiredly from the bed. "And your determination," Ethan replied, noting the strong grip of tiny fingers around his own. "Poor Maria says she's never attended such a stubborn birth." Esther thrived in her role as grandmother, spending hours rocking young Edward and singing songs from her own childhood. Her health continued to improve, as though the baby's arrival had given her a new purpose. Riversbend prospered as well. Ethan's careful management and Charlotte's thrifty household stewardship allowed them to expand, purchasing adjacent land when it became available and increasing their cattle herd. Miguel was promoted to partner rather than foreman, his stake in the ranch a recognition of years of loyal service. 2 years after Edward's birth, Charlotte delivered twin girls Catherine and Elizabeth, who brought both double joy and double exhaustion to the household. Ethan, who had once lived in solitary grief, found himself surrounded by the chaos and warmth of family life. "Did you ever imagine this?" Charlotte asked him one evening as they watched their children playing on the porch under Esther's watchful eye. Ethan shook his head, wonder in his expression. Not even in my wildest dreams. It wasn't always easy. There were droughts that threatened the cattle, illnesses that swept through the family, arguments and reconciliations. When Edward was 7, he fell from a horse and broke his arm so badly the doctor feared he might lose it. Charlotte and Ethan took turns sitting by his bedside for 3 days and nights until the fever broke and healing began. The twins, as different in temperament as they were identical in appearance, challenged their parents in ways Edward never had. Catherine was quiet and bookish like her grandmother, while Elizabeth showed signs of becoming a fearless horsewoman like her father. Through it all, the foundation Ethan and Charlotte had built remained strong, a partnership of equals, rooted in respect and deepened by love. In 1885, 10 years after they had first met, tragedy struck when Esther suffered a stroke. Though she survived, her right side was paralyzed and her speech became slurred and difficult to understand. Charlotte was devastated, but Ethan's steady support helped her through the darkest days. He hired a nurse to help with Esther's care and built a special wheeled chair that allowed her to move about the ground floor of the house. "She gave me a daughter," Ethan said simply when Charlotte tried to thank him, "and 3 grandchildren. There's nothing I wouldn't do for her." Despite her limitations, Esther remained an integral part of family life, attending church services, helping the twins with their reading, and offering silent but heartfelt blessings at each meal. She developed a system of hand signals that allowed her to communicate her needs and opinions, which remained as strong as ever. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Ethan surprised Charlotte with a journey to San Francisco, something she had always dreamed of, but never expected to experience. They left the children in the capable hands of Maria and her eldest daughter, now married to a neighboring rancher. "Are you sure Mother will be all right?" Charlotte fretted as they boarded the train in Del Rio. "Esther practically ordered us to go," Ethan reminded her. "Said we'd been fussing over her too much and needed time alone." The 2 weeks they spent traveling were a second honeymoon of sorts, a chance to rediscover each other away from the responsibilities of ranch and family. They walked along the ocean, attended the theater, and dined in restaurants finer than anything available in Del Rio. "I feel like a girl again," Charlotte confessed as they watched the sunset from their hotel balcony. "Like that girl who stood trembling on the auction block, not daring to hope for anything good." Ethan's arms tightened around her. "I still see her sometimes when you're worried or afraid, but mostly I see the woman you've become, strong, capable, loving." Charlotte turned in his embrace. "Because of you, you gave us a home when we had nothing." "You gave it life," Ethan countered. "Before you came, Riverspend was just land and buildings. You made it a home again." When they returned to Texas, it was with renewed energy and appreciation for the life they'd built together. The children had grown an inch, it seemed, in just 2 weeks. Esther looked better than she had in months, her eyes bright with mischief as she showed off a new quilt she had managed to piece together despite her partial paralysis. Life settled back into its familiar rhythm: cattle to tend, children to raise, a community to support. The Harrington Ranch became known for its hospitality, often hosting neighbors for Sunday dinners or providing shelter to travelers caught by bad weather. In the spring of 1893, as Charlotte approached her 41st birthday, a letter arrived from Del Rio bearing news that shook her to the core. The son of the auctioneer who had sold her and her mother 18 years earlier had discovered old records suggesting the sale had been illegal. "Your father's debts had actually been settled through the sale of his store inventory," the letter explained. "The auction was conducted without proper authority, and the proceeds were misappropriated by my father and the bank manager, who has since died. I am prepared to make restitution for this grievous wrong." Charlotte sat at the kitchen table, the letter trembling in her hands as Ethan read it over her shoulder. "Restitution," she repeated numbly, "for selling us like cattle." Ethan's hand came to rest on her shoulder. "What do you want to do?" Charlotte looked around at the home they had built together, at the marks on the doorframe showing their children's growth, at her mother's rocking chair by the fireplace, at the blue curtains she had sewn with fabric Ethan had chosen to match her eyes. "Nothing," she said finally. What happened was wrong, but it brought us here, to this life." She covered Ethan's hand with her own. "I wouldn't change that for all the restitution in the world." Ethan knelt beside her chair, his eyes level with hers. "Are you sure?" "It's a matter of justice, Charlotte," she nodded slowly. "Justice would have been preventing it in the first place. This is just money, and we don't need it." In the end, they wrote back accepting a token payment, which they donated to the church in Del Rio to establish a fund for widows and orphans. It seemed fitting, somehow, to transform that old injustice into something that might prevent others from facing the same desperate choices. As the 19th century drew to a close, bringing with it new technologies and changing customs, Riverspend adapted while maintaining its essential character. Ethan, now in his 50s with silver threading through his hair, installed a telephone in the ranch office and purchased one of the first automobiles in the county, though he still preferred horseback for most ranch work. Charlotte, whose copper hair had faded to a softer auburn, expanded her interests beyond the household, joining the newly formed Women's Suffrage Association and teaching reading classes for the children of ranch hands. Their own children grew into adults with dreams of their own. Edward, serious and thoughtful like his father, studied law in Austin before returning to manage the ranch's expanding business interests. Catherine became a teacher, and Elizabeth, to no one's surprise, married a rancher from a neighboring property, combining their lands into one of the largest operations in the area. Through it all, Esther remained the family's cornerstone, dispensing wisdom and love even as her body grew frail. On her 90th birthday, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even 2 great-grandchildren, she beckoned Charlotte close. "Remember the auction block?" she asked, her speech still slurred but understandable to those who loved her. Charlotte nodded, holding her mother's gnarled hand. "I was so afraid," Esther continued. "But then that tall cowboy bid for us both, and something told me to trust him." Her rheumy eyes sought Ethan across the room. "Best judgment I ever made." 3 months later, Esther slipped away peacefully in her sleep. The family buried her beneath a cottonwood tree on a hill overlooking the ranch, where wildflowers bloomed in spring and the view stretched all the way to the river. "She loved this place as much as we do," Charlotte said as they stood by the fresh grave. "She helped make it what it is," Ethan replied, his arm strong around his wife's shoulders despite the grief that bent them both. That evening, as they sat on the porch that had witnessed so many conversations over the years, Charlotte leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder. "I've been thinking about that day," she said quietly, "when you bought us at the auction." "What about it?" Ethan asked, his fingers idly stroking her hair. "You said once that you did it because no one had helped your mother and sister." "But there must have been other women in need over the years. Why us?" Ethan was silent for a long moment. "I saw the way you held your mother's hand," he said finally. "The way you stood between her and the crowd like you'd fight the whole world to protect her. It reminded me of," his voice caught. "It reminded me of how I'd tried and failed to protect my family." Charlotte turned to face him, cupping his weathered cheek in her palm. "You didn't fail, Ethan. You built all this." She gestured to the ranch around them, to the home they'd filled with love and children and memories. "You gave us both a second chance." "We gave each other second chances," he corrected gently. As the stars appeared above them, Charlotte and Ethan remained on the porch, their hands clasped as they had been so many evenings before. The sounds of their grown children's voices drifted from inside the house, mingled with the laughter of grandchildren and the familiar creaks and sighs of the home they had built together. From that first desperate day on the auction block to this quiet evening of shared contentment, they had walked a long road together through joy and sorrow, triumph and loss, always finding in each other the strength to continue. "I love you, Ethan Harrington," Charlotte whispered, the words as true now as they had been on their wedding day. "And I love you, Charlotte Harrington," he replied, bending to kiss her with the tenderness of decades shared. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days to come." As night settled fully over Riverspend Ranch, the light from their window shone like a beacon across the Texas landscape, a testament to love that had begun in the darkest of circumstances, but had blazed into something enduring and true. lighting the way for generations to come.